Hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Yeah, welcome to another episode of the Hype Show. I am Big J all day, aka the Mighty Big J. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a while since I've done an episode, but I do appreciate you joining me here. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe to the channel here. It's definitely great. I do appreciate it. And if you're new to the channel, and if this is your first time, definitely subscribe. And if you aren't new to the channel, thank you again for joining me for another episode. This is a Tuesday episode here. What we're going to do for this episode, we're going to catch up with all the Week 15 action that occurred here and also kind of get you a little bit of a preview for the Week 16 matchup for Thursday night coming up here between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams. But we're going to start with the Thursday night football matchup last week on December 7th that kicked off, December 14th that kicked off the matchups in Week 15 here. And that was the Los Angeles Chargers at the Las Vegas Raiders. That was the Thursday night football matchup here. That was the Los Angeles Chargers' first game since they were out their quarterback, Justin Herbert, who went down with a season-ending injury on his throwing hand here. He actually broke the index finger, and so he had to have surgery and was out for the entire season here. He won't be available until 2024. He also had a broken finger on his non-throwing hand as well. So he has a broken finger on each hand. I couldn't imagine having the one, but he has a broken finger on each hand. So that kind of stinks. But yeah, he's not able to grip or throw a football. So as a result, he'll be out for the rest of the season. And they're rolling with Easton Stick as their quarterback here for the rest of the year. It was not a good game for the Los Angeles Chargers organization. The Raiders beat them by a final score of 63-21. The score was 42-0 at half, and Aiden O'Connell had 4 touchdowns by halftime. He didn't have to do much else in the second half at all. And actually, the touchdowns that came in the second half for the Raiders, one was on defense, and one was actually thrown by Jacoby Myers to Devontae Adams for a touchdown. And there was actually two touchdowns on defense. One was a fumble return by John Jenkins, 44 yards, and Jack Jones had a 16-yard interception return for a touchdown. So the Raiders just beat the Chargers into submission to the point where the Chargers actually fired their head coach Brandon Staley on Friday morning, and they also fired their GM as well, the general manager. I just Yeah, that's just kind of just let you know the season is pretty much done. Tom Telesco, the general manager who they fired, he had been with this team 12 seasons, and Brandon Staley, this was actually after 2.5 seasons of him being with the team. Giff Smith is the team's outside linebackers coach. He's going to be the interim head coach going forward. And JoJo Wooden, who's the director of player personnel, he's going to step into the general manager role on an interim basis until they decide who they're going to be hiring in those positions permanently. Brandon Staley, he's actually the second head coach in Chargers history to be fired mid-season since 1970. The other was Kevin Gilbride back in 1998 when the team started out 2-8. So that was actually kind of something that I had talked about in previous broadcasts, that there was a lot of things that I saw where I saw Brandon Staley being fired if he didn't get it together. And even with Justin Herbert going out there, I still felt like the fire was lit under him, that they were going to be getting rid of him if he didn't do things here. And with a 63-21 beatdown, especially to the Raiders, that just kind of solidified his fate. The team also fired Jay Rogers. He was the defensive run game coordinator and the defensive line coach as well. So 3 people ended up losing their job as a result of this. This is actually Justin Herbert's second coach that they fired since he was drafted in 2020. His first coach was Anthony Lynn, who he had for his rookie season, and he went 7-9 that year. He was 33-31 from 2017 to 2020. So the Chargers will definitely be looking for another head coach. I honestly, if I'm the Chargers, I would just kind of just see where things are in the offseason at this point. They're definitely at the bottom of the division, and they're probably not going to get a playoff spot. They're not even mentioned as being in the hunt. So they're not officially eliminated, but it's going to take a lot for this team to get into that spot, and I just don't see it happening. On the Raiders, on the flip side, they improved to 6-8, but they still got some work to do as well. So we'll just kind of have to see how things go. Every team is down to their last few games, so we'll just kind of have to see how things shake out for everybody. But a lot of important games coming up this week for sure, and a lot of things kind of happen here in the last week that we're seeing here with that kind of solidify where teams are going to be in the AFC. The AFC is a very tight division, so or tight conference, excuse me. So at this point, if you're one of the teams that are in like the 5, 6, 7 seed at those bottom part of the conference or the bottom part of the race, you can't lose any more games. So like I said, the Raiders improved to 6-8. The Chargers fall to 5-9. The Raiders, as far as scheduling here, their last final games that they have left here, looking at their schedule, they're at the Kansas City Chiefs on Christmas Day at 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. Then they're at the Indianapolis Colts the following week on New Year's Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. And then they finish off the season hosting the Denver Broncos on January 7th. The Chargers, on the flip side, their schedule, looking at their schedule, it's just they're just again riding out the season. You're not going to have Justin Herbert anymore, and possibly Keenan Allen. He might be out for the rest of this for the season as well. There's only a few games left, and he's been dealing with an ankle injury all year, so we'll kind of have to see where he's at. But the Chargers are they hosting the Buffalo Bills here on December 23rd, which is this coming Saturday. Then they're at the Denver Broncos on New Year's Eve, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on CBS, before hosting the Kansas City Chiefs to close out the season on January the 7th. So, like I said, as far as the Chargers, they're just going to be looking to get things put in place, because basically when you hire or fire your head coach and your GM and another coach as well, that basically means the season is over. Because if this was a team making the playoffs and they had a shot, these things wouldn't be happening. But at 5-9, they're pretty much done. And I gotta say, the another thing about the Chargers that I talked about, their top pick, Quentin Johnston, the 22nd pick, the wide receiver out of TCU. When Keenan Allen went down with his injury and Austin Eckler was out to start the year, I kind of said that his name would be the name that would kind of take over things. He definitely didn't do what he was supposed to do and was very underwhelming in the offense. And the thing that kills me about him is if you go and look at the draft and you look at some of the wide receivers that were taken after him, it's just nuts. For example, Quentin Johnston, again, he was taken with the 22nd pick in the draft of the first round here. Listen to some of these names of who are taken at wide receiver just after him. Zay Flowers was taken the pick after him, number 23 by the Baltimore Ravens. He's having a great year. Jordan Addison was taken 24th by the Minnesota Vikings. He's having a pretty awesome year with Justin Jefferson missing a chunk of the season. At tight end, Dalton Kincaid was taken 26th by the Buffalo Bills. He's having a wonderful year. Nolan Smith was taken 30. I'm sorry, Miles Murphy. He was taken number 29 by the Cincinnati Bengals. He's having a great season. Nolan Smith, out of Georgia, he was taken 31st by the Philadelphia Eagles. He's having a wonderful season. So when you look at just some of the players just in the first round taken right after him, and you look at some of the wide receivers later in the draft that were taken, Quentin Johnston definitely a swing and a miss for this team as far as what he's able to do. He looked great at the combine. Of course, he played on a team that was in the national championship, so obviously that's going to help you, but he just isn't the guy that they thought he would be this season. He's definitely going to have to get some more reps on his system and also just kind of get it together in camp heading into next season. And with a large chunk of these players heading into free agency or heading into a cap situation with the new general manager, there's a lot of uncertainty with this team, with the Los Angeles Chargers. So a lot of uncertainty. They're going to have a long summer ahead of them, but that's kind of just how things go with teams from year to year. You either make it or you don't. You have to get it right every summer. But the Raiders absolutely hammered the Chargers. As far as the Raiders, they're still in the hunt, but like I said, they need a lot of things to fall their way, and they need to win the rest of their games. They can't lose any more games whatsoever. Speaking of a team that can't lose any more games here, these next games we're going to talk about here are the 3 games that took place on Saturday. We're actually going to start with the night game that took place on Saturday night here. This game took place between the Denver Broncos traveling to take on the Detroit Lions. And then, like I said, speaking of a team that can't lose any more games, this is another situation where the Broncos found themselves on the end of a blowout by a final score of 42-17. The Lions actually led this game 21-0 at the half. The Broncos did score 17 points, but it was just one of those situations where they just looked very listless on both sides of the ball as they did many times earlier in the year. And so this is just a bad time for them to lose games here, certainly. They've now lost actually 2 of 3 games here after going on that 5-game winning streak. And Russell Wilson, he had another pedestrian day. He was 18 of 32 for 223 yards to just the 1 touchdown. But the situation for me is Jared Goff had 5 touchdowns. He was 24 of 34 for 278 yards. And you also got another 100-yard game from Jahmyr Gibbs with 11 carries and also a touchdown as well. They had 185 yards on the ground total as a team if you include David Montgomery going for 85 yards as well. The team as a whole, Detroit, they were definitely firing on all cylinders on offense here. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 7 catches for 112 yards and a touchdown. And the Broncos just never could really do anything with him or Sam Laporta, the tight end. He had 5 catches for 56 yards and 3 touchdowns on 6 targets. There was just to go around on the passing game here and the running game for Detroit. They just were firing on all cylinders. The Broncos, unfortunately, they were only able to get 83 yards on the ground. Leading the way for them was Samaje Perine. He had 6 carries for 37 yards. Javonte Williams had 12 carries, but was only able to muster 27 yards on the ground. So Russell Wilson, with him not being able to get the ball moving on the ground, they're definitely going to be able to look at parts of the offense and say to themselves and kind of guess what he's going to do as far as throwing the football if you can't get the running game going. So, me personally, the Broncos at this point being 7-7 now, they definitely got themselves back in the mix after starting out 1-5. But there still may not be enough time for them to get themselves in the playoffs with them losing these last couple of games, winning how they have. So they're going to be at home against the New England Patriots on Christmas Eve. It's actually the night game coming up this Sunday, 6:15 Mountain Time. It's 8:15 Eastern. That'll be on the NFL Network. The Christmas schedule is kind of strange here, and I'll definitely get into that later this week and kind of go over all those games with you here. But yeah, the Broncos, their next game coming up here is going to be on Christmas Eve, and they'll be hosting New England Patriots here. We'll talk about their results later in the broadcast, but for the Broncos, they definitely got to win these next few games that are coming up. They don't really have much room for failure at this point here because there's so many teams that are in that 7-7, 8-6 part of the standings as far as that goes. And also, you got to consider the tiebreakers that come into consideration with the Broncos. With them losing to teams like the Houston Texans already, that kind of just leaves them in kind of a bad spot. Now, winning against teams like the Buffalo Bills definitely helps, but the Buffalo Bills and Houston Texans each have a better record than Denver. Pittsburgh has a tiebreaker over Denver because they have a better record in the AFC. So the Broncos are currently sitting 11th right now as a result of that loss. So they definitely wouldn't be in the playoffs if the playoffs were to start today. There'd be some good teams left out. So the Broncos are running out of time. If it's a situation where they lose another game, it's going to be possibly getting close to elimination for the Broncos. So they definitely got to get things together. On the flip side, with the way things have gone with the Detroit Lions, looking at the AFC or the NFC, excuse me, the Detroit Lions are actually sitting pretty in third in the NFC. The Cowboys have a tiebreaker over Detroit because of the win percentage in the NFC. They're 7-3 in the conference, and Detroit is 6-3. So that's why the Cowboys sit at the number 2 seed, even though they're both 10-4. The 49ers have already clinched the division. They've already won the NFC West. They're not. None of those teams will be able to catch up. There's only 3 games left, and the Rams and Seahawks are each 4 games behind. So they'll have the division locked up. Now the 49ers are focused on getting that 1 seed so that the NFC has to run through the Bay Area, barring any unforeseen circumstances. So 49ers are sitting pretty here, and especially with the Seahawks, even though they got the win last night over Philadelphia, like I said in earlier broadcasts, they're going to be fighting for a wild card. I didn't think that they'd win the division at any point, even when they were tied with the 49ers at that point at 6-3. Because the 49ers have taken off into another direction. The Seahawks have kind of been mired in the muck ever since. So, to me personally, the Seahawks, they're on the outside looking in right now because of the tiebreakers that the Rams have over them, beating them head-to-head, and because of the Vikings beating them head-to-head as well. So, me personally, the Seahawks could be in trouble, even though they won last night. They could be in trouble. And the thing that's really unfair is if you look at the NFC South, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're tied for the lead at 7-7, but they have the tiebreaker over New Orleans because they've beat them head-to-head already. So whoever sits in that 5 seed, like for example, the Philadelphia Eagles, they have a playoff spot, but they're still fighting for the division. And as of right now, they would be the 5 seed because of their loss last night. So what's going to happen here is the best wild card team is going to have a better record most likely than the NFC South winner, and they'll have to travel on the road to play that game. I could see a situation where Philadelphia or Dallas has to travel to Tampa for the wild card round, and that's just kind of how things work as far as that goes here. So, like I said, the San Francisco 49ers, they're sitting pretty right now with the way things are going here in the NFC. And I just looking at the whole conference as a whole, it just kind of makes me wonder who's going to get in and who's not because things are tight at the bottom of each division. So But yeah, looking ahead to this past Saturday's action here, the next game we're going to talk about here, the Minnesota Vikings, they were at the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, Detroit defeated the Denver Broncos by a final score of 42-17. The Detroit Lions, again, they're sitting pretty at third in the NFC, just to kind of reiterate what we were talking about. And the Denver Broncos, they definitely got some work to do. Even if they win out, there may be some tiebreakers that preclude them from getting in. But we'll just have to see how things go here. But yeah, switching gears here to the next game we're going to talk about from Saturday, this past Saturday, the Minnesota Vikings defeated the Cincinnati Bengals by a final score, or the Minnesota Vikings fell to the Bengals by a final score of 27-24. This was actually a game of backups, but it actually turned out to be a really entertaining game here. And for the Cincinnati Bengals, they kept themselves in the mix, and they're currently 8-6, and they sit sixth in the AFC here. So they've got themselves in a pretty good spot, and they're sitting pretty. The thing that I'm liking here about the Bengals is that they're actually 3-1 since Joe Burrow went down with that wrist injury. So that's something to note here. Jake Browning has done a wonderful job here filling in for Joe Burrow here. Jamar Chase did suffer an AC joint sprain in his shoulder, and he's probably going to miss a couple of games here as a result of that. He's most definitely going to miss this game coming up here. But for me, if the Cincinnati Bengals can hang tough here and keep things kind of going as they have, they'll be in great shape. As far as advancing in the playoffs, that's going to be a whole nother story. And it's just kind of masterful that this team has been able to do what they've done since starting out 1-3. I said in previous broadcasts as well here that this team has a tendency to do that. They'll start out kind of tough and then just kind of get things going later in the season, and that's what you're seeing here. So, like I said, Cincinnati, they would be sitting in the sixth spot here. Jamar Chase is most likely going to miss the game coming up this Saturday at Pittsburgh. That game is 4:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC Saturday afternoon. The game is, as far as on New Year's Eve at Kansas City, he'll probably be questionable for that, but they'll say he'll most likely miss the Saturday game for sure. So that's another huge blow not having Jamar Chase. But the way T. Higgins is playing, he's definitely can step in and be a reliable number one for this team and for Jake Browning. So they still have a shot here. The Pittsburgh Steelers are struggling on offense here, and they're definitely looking to get themselves right as well. So that could still be a win for Cincinnati. We'll just have to see how things shake out on Saturday for you. On the flip side, as far as the Minnesota Vikings here in the NFC here, this kind of put them in a precarious spot as well here because they were winning games here previously prior to this here, and they've now lost 3 of their last 4 games here. They were on a roll for a while, and they've kind of just hit a situation where they're just not where they want it to be. Now, they're 3 games behind Detroit with 3 games to play, so nothing has been officially clinched as far as the NFC North. But because they're hosting Detroit this weekend, that'll determine what's going to happen with that. If they lose this weekend, Detroit will win the NFC North as a result of that. So we'll kind of have to see how things shake here. But on Christmas Eve here, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox, the Vikings host the Detroit Lions. And then they actually play them to close out the year with Green Bay squeezed in the middle. So the rest of these games are not only pivotal for them to get in as a playoff team, but they're all divisional. So that determines a lot of the tiebreakers that go along with that. The Vikings are going to give Nick Mullins the start again at quarterback here. They did work on with Joshua Dobbs previously until the loss at Las Vegas 3-0 a previous Sunday, and then losing the football game at Cincinnati this past Saturday. The Vikings, to me, they won the Raiders game 3-0, lowest scoring indoor game in history, but to me, the Vikings, they still got a shot. It's just a matter of consistency down the stretch here. They just lost a lot of guys due to injury and or attrition. So it's just kind of tough to say what they're going to do. So we'll just kind of have to pay attention to see how things are going for the Minnesota Vikings. They're still sitting in 6th right now in the NFC. So they would have a playoff spot if the playoffs were to start today, ironically against Detroit. But there's a few other teams right below them at 7-7 and 6-8 as well. There's 5 teams below them, and all within a game or two. So if you're the Minnesota Vikings, you got to win out in order to keep that position, plain and simple. The same with the Rams; they're sitting at the 7th spot at 7-7 due to tiebreakers as well. So the Seahawks, the Saints, the Falcons, they're all right there. The Packers as well; they're all in the hunt. The Giants and Bears are sitting at 5-9. They're not officially eliminated, but they're very close. They're sitting very close with that 5-9 record. So just kind of anything can happen here over the course of the next few weeks here, and that's definitely what the teams are looking at. They just got to win out in order to get themselves in the right spot. The last game we're going to talk about before we get to the Sunday slate, and get to the Monday night football game as well. The last game we're talking about from Saturday was the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Indianapolis Colts. Here, that game taking place this past Saturday afternoon at Lucas Oil Stadium, and the Indianapolis Colts got a win by the final score of 30-13 to improve themselves to 8-6. The Steelers unfortunately fall to 7-7. They each had the same record coming into this game, so this was pivotal as far as the playoff seeding I was talking about. And the Colts, they currently sit at the 7th spot at 8-6. With the Pittsburgh Steelers, they fell to 10th. And they have a tiebreaker over Denver as far as the AFC, so that's why they're sitting at 10th and Denver at 11th, even though both teams are 7-7. So this is one of those situations for me where the problem with the Pittsburgh Steelers is that their offense has been pretty bad almost all year, average to bad all season. You can't consistently just rely on the defense to bail you out. The defense plays well every week for this team, and there's just so many situations where the offense has just let them down or just not done enough on the point side to keep them in the game. Mitchell Trubisky, to me, there's a reason why he's been with a few different teams. He wasn't the answer when Chicago drafted him, and then he had to stop for a year in Buffalo where he was Josh Allen's backup before coming to Pittsburgh. Trubisky, to me, is a very pedestrian quarterback, and that's kind of what their roster looks like. If you count Kenny Pickett, who's currently injured right now, if you count Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky, looking at their roster as a whole, they just have a lot of pedestrian quarterbacks here. Now, they're going to go with Mason Rudolph, who's been on the team for a while, and again, he's another very pedestrian quarterback. He's been a Pittsburgh Steeler for quite some time now, and he's only started as a result of injury or people getting traded or cut. He's never been a guy that just start right off the bat. Now, hosting the Cincinnati Bengals on Saturday here, December 23rd at 4:30 Eastern on NBC is a very pivotal game here. This is actually their last home game of the season before they go on the road their last 2 weeks to Seattle and Buffalo, respectively, or Baltimore, excuse me. So Mason Rudolph, he may be ready for the start. He says that he's battle tested and ready to go. Those are his words, not mine. But at this point in the season, you can't lose any more games here. To put yourself below 500, you would not only be further out of the playoff race here, but a lot of the pub around the Pittsburgh Steelers with Mike Tomlin specifically is that he's never had an under 500 season. And so there's going to be a lot of talk about that as well here. So if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is all or nothing, because even if you do win, you could be out because of all the tiebreakers and whatnot that exists to go along with that. So we'll just have to see how that shakes out here. And as far as the Indianapolis Colts here, as I said, they're 8-6 and they've got themselves in the seedings right now as far as playoffs. They're definitely playing above expectations with all the injuries they've had here. With Anthony Richardson going down for the season, a lot of people thought the season may have been lost, or this may have been another year where they're going to be drafting high in the draft. And I genuinely think that's not the case anymore, especially with them being 8-6. They're definitely in the race for a playoff spot. As far as the division goes, there's a three-way tie at the top of that division with Jacksonville and Houston all being 8-6 as well with Indy. So Indianapolis has a shot to win this division. Jacksonville has lost 3 games in a row. They're reeling right now here. They're definitely in trouble. They've lost 3 games in a row, and it's a situation where I genuinely don't see where the relief is for them. The AFC North was just a beast to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They lost to Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Baltimore all in a row. Those are all hard-hitting teams, and Jacksonville was unable to rise to the challenge. So Indianapolis here, to me, they got a huge chance to take things and kind of just run with them as far as the division, because Houston, with C.J. Stroud suffering from that concussion last week here, we'll have to see if he comes out of protocol to play this week. But them losing Tank Dell on the wide receiver side of the ball and Nico Collins as well, that really hurt their offense. So Houston may be in trouble, and they may still have to settle for a wild card or possibly missing the playoffs as a whole, even with the improvement of everything on this team. So we'll just kind of have to see how that shakes out. But like I said at the beginning of the season, with a lot of the broadcasts following that, this AFC South division is tight. The only team that's out of it is the Tennessee Titans at 5-9. They're officially eliminated from playoff contention. So that's the only team that's actually out of anything at this point. So the Indianapolis Colts, to me, they're at Atlanta on Christmas Eve this coming Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. Then they're hosting the Las Vegas Raiders after that on New Year's Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS, before hosting the Houston Texans to end the season. that Week 18 matchup hosting the Houston Texans might determine a playoff spot. That's going to be a very huge game for the Indianapolis Colts. So we'll just have to see what they do this coming Sunday. I'll definitely have a prediction for you coming up here as far as what they do against the Atlanta Falcons. But the Indianapolis Colts have definitely put themselves in a great position here to make some noise here. And considering the way the season was looking, it's very surprising to me. So shout out Shane Steichen here, especially being a first-year head coach for this team here. He definitely is keeping this team above water, especially with all the holes they have. So that's definitely great to see. The next game we're going to talk about here is going to be one of the results from the Sunday matchups. We're going to talk about all the games that happened on Sunday, December 17th here just a couple of days ago. And then we'll end the broadcast with what happened last night between the Philadelphia Eagles and Seattle Seahawks for the Monday Night Football matchup here. But the next game we're going to talk about here is the Chicago Bears traveling to take on the Cleveland Browns. And this was actually a really good game here. I felt like Cleveland should have done more to kind of solidify things, but the defense definitely played well. And the game was won by a final score of 20-17 by the Cleveland Browns. They've also improved themselves as well in the playoff seedings. And here they're currently sitting at 8-6 in the standings. I'm sorry, 9-5, excuse me. They're second in the division behind the Baltimore Ravens, so they still have a shot at the division. But as far as the wild card seedings, they put themselves in great position because they're at the 5th spot here, so at 9-5. So this was definitely a game they needed, and this is another team that's playing above expectations as far as the wins because they've been on 4 different quarterbacks this season, which is crazy to me. Joe Flacco, he threw 3 interceptions in this game, but they were able to still get the win despite that. So that just goes to show you what this team is made of as well here for them to be able to get the victory despite that type of play. And he even said himself that he needs to play better next game coming out. So I'm sure they will, but against the Chicago Bears, you can have games like that, unfortunately. The Bears aren't an awful team. They've definitely improved themselves a lot since the beginning of the season. But on the flip side, once you give away a ball 3 times like that to the other team, they can usually make points out of that. And unfortunately, the Bears were unable to do that. So, like I said, Joe Flacco did have 3 interceptions, but he did throw 2 touchdowns as well. He was 28 of 44 for 374 yards. Justin Fields for the Bears was 19 of 40 for 166 yards and a touchdown, but he also had 2 picks of his own, and he rushed the football 7 times for 30 yards. So this game was filled with turnovers, and that's what kind of kept it low scoring. Each team kind of fumbled the ball and and had interceptions to where they didn't throw the ball decisively at certain points in the game. So I think that's what occurred here with both teams here. But luckily, the Browns were able to come away with a win. There was a Hail Mary that was thrown at the end of the game, and the Bears almost had a shot at catching that. The ball landed right in the lap of Darnell Mooney, but unfortunately he lost momentum and accidentally kicked the ball out and then ended up in an interception to Cleveland, and they were able to win the game and seal the victory that way. So the Bears actually had a shot at winning this game late. It just came down to that final play that they were unable to get it done. The Bears are 5-9. They're out of the playoff race as far as I'm concerned here. I think they are officially eliminated from contention as we speak here. Yeah, they're officially no, they're 5-9. They still have a shot, but they're very close to being eliminated from playoff contention. Also, much like the New York Giants as well at that 5-9 mark. They're right there. If they lose another game, they're probably out. And even with the way tiebreakers unfold, they could still win games and still be out as well. So the Bears, to me, when I was talking about them at the beginning of the season, I had them as a team that was picking high in the draft. They're going to be picking high in the draft because the Carolina Panthers pick belongs to them as a result of the trade for Bryce Young. So they're going to be picking there anyway because of how bad Carolina is. But as far as their draft pick, they may be picking a little further down in the first round, somewhere around 8 or 9, depending on where the other teams in the NFL shake up. I thought this was going to be a situation where they were going to be so bad that they would be picking 1, 2 in the NFL draft, which has never happened before. But it's a situation where they've won a few games lately here, and I just find it compelling that they wanted to do that. But a lot of these guys want to fight, and a lot of these guys want to compete. And I think acquiring Montez Sweat for a draft pick from the Washington Commanders has actually made this defense better, especially on the pass rush. So that's a large part of the reason why they've been the way they have as well. They're not getting blown out in games anymore, and they're kind of just hanging around and just kind of keeping things interesting, even if they do lose. So, like I said, the Bears fell to 5-9, and with the Cleveland Browns at 9-5, they definitely got themselves sitting pretty as far as the playoff hunt here. Looking at their next couple games here, they're at the Houston Texans on Christmas Eve at 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS before hosting the New York Jets that following Thursday, December 28th at 8:15 p.m. Eastern on Prime Video. That's going to be very interesting, that Cleveland Houston game coming up here on Sunday, because that game is important for both teams as far as playoff solidification. Because one slip up could put you out here. Even teams that win out lose out due to tiebreakers and games that happened earlier in the year. That's just kind of the way the NFL's work. This happened every year. It happens every year. A team gets left out because they don't have the tiebreaker. They may have a great record, but that tiebreaker does them in. So you may be seeing that here if you lose any of these games coming up here, or if you just have a situation where you lost the game earlier in the year and it cost you. So the Cleveland Browns, in my opinion, here, they've kind of been on a roll. They lost a couple of games earlier in the month here to Denver and the Rams, and they've won their last two here since. So the Texans game, I'll have a prediction for you here on Sunday when that game's taking place, but that's going to definitely be a good game here, because that's going to tell who's going to do what as far as the conference and where they're going to be solidified. On the next game, we're going to talk about, switching gears here, was an NFC matchup here between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were hosted by the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field, and they're able to come away with the victory out of Wisconsin by a final score of 34-20. Baker Mayfield threw for 381 yards and 4 touchdowns, and he had a very, very solid day. He looked very comfortable throwing the football all day, and he definitely outdueled Jordan Love by a long shot. He definitely had a much better day. Now, Jordan Love didn't have any interceptions, but he just wasn't as effective with the football, even though he threw it more. Baker Mayfield was 22 of 28, again, with 381 yards and 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Jordan Love was 29 of 39 with 284 yards, but he had 2 touchdowns. He also had no interceptions as well. The team as a whole, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, were able to rush for 99 yards on the ground. Rashad White getting most of those with 21 carries for 89 yards. The Green Bay Packers, on the flip side, were only able to get 60 yards on the ground, with Aaron Jones leading the way, 13 carries for 53 yards. The other thing that really jumped out to me here was also the turnovers here. Jordan Love did fumble a football, but Baker Mayfield fumbled a football as well. So it wasn't a situation where there was a hefty amount of turnovers, but neither team was able to capitalize on their turnovers for points. So this is a situation where the offense had to make sure that things were being done on their side of the ball, and that's what took care of this game for the Buccaneers. 10 catches for 155 yards was the day for Chris Godwin as well. He didn't hit a touchdown, but he definitely got 12 targets, and he definitely was the reason why they were able to get the ball down the field. Another thing that I mentioned in previous broadcasts was that Chris Godwin, he's the type of receiver that moves the chains for you and gets you down the field, even if he doesn't have touchdowns that day. David Moore, Mike Evans, and Rashad White all caught touchdowns from Baker Mayfield. But Chris Godwin definitely led the day as far as the catches and as far as receiving yards. And he had 4 first downs of those 10 catches. So that's kind of what he does. He's definitely a possession receiver, even though he has days where he can go off and go crazy on you. On the flip side for the Packers, they fall to 6-8 with this loss. This definitely was a situation where I put them further back in the playoff race here, and it's now their second straight loss after having won a few games in a row in November. They were at the New York Giants and lost on Monday Night Football, and then losing this past Sunday to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here has kind of put them further back as far as the standings go here. For me, the Green Bay Packers, the offense wasn't bad. It just wasn't as efficient as what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did to them, and that's what did them in. The defense played fair, but the story of this here was the offenses on each side of the foot, on each team here. Now, the Green Bay Packers, they were in the playoff hunt until this loss, but this loss puts them at the 11th spot. And the reason why they sit at the 11th spot is because the Atlanta Falcons beat them earlier in the year to put them, they're 6-8 as well. The Atlanta Falcons beat them earlier in the year. So they have the head-to-head tiebreaker over the Green Bay Packers right now. See, that's one of those things I was talking about. The Green Bay Packers losing to Atlanta, that loss was all the way back in September, but that loss, even though it was week 2, it affects you all the way through to the end. A 1-point loss at Atlanta by a score of 25-24 is what's affecting them right now as far as the tiebreaker. Now, the thing about them is this. They got a couple games here where they should be able to right the ship. They're at the Carolina Panthers on Christmas Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. And then they're at the Minnesota Vikings on New Year's Eve for Sunday Night Football. If they can get those 2 games in their hand before hosting the Chicago Bears, I think that'll kind of put them back where they need to be. But losing these last couple of games definitely pulled them out of that race. They were sitting at the 6th spot a couple of weeks ago. Now they're completely out of it. So they definitely got to get these next games back under their belt. But a lot of this is going to come down to the final week of the season, much like it does with previous seasons. So we're going to be talking about this a lot until the playoffs get set up and get solidified. As far as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, they now lead the NFC South because of the head-to-head tiebreaker with the New Orleans Saints at 7-7. And to me, Baker Mayfield is having a fabulous season. This is one of those situations where I stated this before. He's looking to prove that he's a quarterback that can play in this league, and he's definitely got the grit, the toughness, and the confidence in himself to do that. And that's kind of the thing about Baker Mayfield. That's why he's not out of the league like somebody like a Carson Wentz was for a while. It's not a situation where he's injured a lot. It's a situation where he just didn't work out with previous teams. And me personally, I think it's going to be a great matchup here for the Buccaneers for the future here as far as him being the quarterback. To me, they're hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars on Christmas Eve, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on CBS, before hosting the Saints, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. If they can get those two victories under their belt before traveling to Carolina, I think they'll win the division. I think beating the Jacksonville Jaguars and the New Orleans Saints will get them the division, because they'll have beaten the New Orleans Saints head to head twice, and then I think at Carolina is definitely a win, because I don't think they're going to hold out any players or anything like that. So Tampa Bay, they got a great shot to kind of just put things right there where they need to be. They're in the driver's seat after winning the last few games in a row. So sitting at 7-7 it sounds underwhelming, but I said about this division about a month or so ago, it's going to be a very tight, underwhelming division, and the winner of this division could have a 9-8, 8-9 record, and I think that's what Tampa Bay could be, is 9-8 at this point here, based on the way the schedule looks. Even if they were to lose to, say, Jacksonville this coming Sunday, they're probably going to be 9-8, 10-7. So they got a shot at that 10-7 here, based on the way things look right now. But definitely proud of Baker Mayfield. He's got 3,315 passing yards on the season with 24 touchdowns. So he's definitely looking like a champ, and especially coming after Tom Brady the last few years, that's definitely probably an added pressure that people probably wouldn't be able to handle in his situation. So kudos to him. He's definitely doing a great job here. The next game we're going to talk about here is an AFC matchup here that took place in the AFC South between the Houston Texans and Tennessee Titans. This game went to overtime, but Houston was able to escape Tennessee with a win by a final score of 19-16. As I said, the Tennessee Titans, they fell to 5-9 and are officially out of the playoff race, out of playoff contention. And the Houston Texans improved to Houston 8-6 to keep themselves in a tie with Indianapolis and Jacksonville. So that division is officially up for grabs, with Jacksonville losing their last 3 games in a row, and with Indianapolis and Houston finding ways to win the last few weeks. The Texans, they didn't look good against the Jets at all, but I think a lot of that had to do with Nico Collins going down with an injury, and then C.J. Stroud getting concussed. So the Houston Texans, to me, I still think they're going to have a playoff spot in their future after being one of the worst teams in the league last year, which is crazy. Typically, when you're drafting one of the top two picks in the draft, you were one of the worst teams in the league last year, and for them to go from that to a playoff spot is pretty awesome. So the Houston Texans, they're definitely in the mix as far as getting a playoff spot. We'll just have to see how the rest of their games shake out. And like I said, with Tennessee, they're out of the playoff race at 5-9. They're officially eliminated from playoff contention. And Derrick Henry, he's going to be a free agent after the year, and he's basically, the way that he's talking, he's not sure that he's going to be staying with the Tennessee Titans after this year. So there might be some changes coming their way as well here. We'll just have to see how everything shakes out here. But when you're going with the rookie quarterback with Will Levis, you may have to draft another running back. You may have to sign some receivers. DeAndre Hopkins is still there, but I'm not sure what'll happen with him, or if they'll keep him or not, or trade him. We'll have to see how that goes here. But back to the Houston Texans here. They're hosting the Cleveland Browns, as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, and that's going to be crazy. That's going to be one of those situations where that could very well determine a playoff spot, and also add a tiebreaker into the mix as well, because of the fact that they're facing each other head to head. So this game coming up against Cleveland is incredibly pivotal. They host the Tennessee Titans on New Year's Eve before traveling to Indy on January 7th. So we'll just have to see how things shake out for Houston, but they're definitely still in a spot to win that division. And like I said, the Tennessee Titans, they're out of the playoff race here. They're definitely looking towards next year. We'll just have to see how things shake out with Derrick Henry, but I highly doubt he's staying there, because they don't really have a running back by the name of Tajay Spears, and he's not that far behind him in snaps. So they may want to go that route as well, and possibly draft a running back, draft a wide receiver. But as far as the Tennessee Titans, they're done as far as any contention and everything. They're just playing, just kind of seeing what the personnel looks like. The next game we're going to talk about here, this is another AFC South matchup that took place in the AFC East. It took place between the Miami Dolphins and the New York Jets. This game was never close, and it was one of those situations where Zach Wilson, he again did not look good. This was a final score of 30-0 Miami. 30-0. The Miami Dolphins, they just never let off the gas. And they just, even without having Tyreek Hill, they still dominated this team here. They outscored the New York Jets in both of their games this season outscored them by a combined score of 64-13 in two games. At Miami and at the New York Jets. It just doesn't matter. They bring the whooping on the road. So the Miami Dolphins, they're in great shape. They sit at 10-4. They're probably going to win this division. Buffalo is still in the mix. They're still right there at 8-6. But I don't know. I just don't really know if Buffalo, the way that they played against Dallas, we'll talk about that here in a bit. But I just don't know with Buffalo because Josh Allen didn't have that great of a day, and they were still able to get the victory. So the Miami Dolphins, they're actually hosting the Dallas Cowboys on Christmas Eve, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox, before they travel to Baltimore to take on the Ravens on New Year's Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. So um, they're hosting the Buffalo Bills to finish out the season on January 7th, the last week of the year. So that game could possibly determine the division. But I'm still leaning towards Miami at this point here because we'll have to see what Buffalo does with their schedule coming up here as well. But I'm leaning towards Miami at this time. The Jets, they're not officially out of the playoff. Actually, they are out of playoff contention. I apologize. Since they are out of playoff contention at 5-9, one thing that we won't have to hear much of anymore is if Aaron Rodgers is coming back because with his Achilles injury, I thought it was kind of strange that they consistently talked about him coming back, consistently talked about him possibly coming back for this game and coming up against the Commanders on Sunday. I just always thought that was nonsense, coming back so quickly from an Achilles tear. Because any athlete that I've ever heard about that had an Achilles tear, it took them more than a year to get right. And so the idea of him coming back just after 3-4 months was just kind of wild to me. But they officially shut that down here with the situation of them being out of the playoff race. They host the Washington Commanders on Christmas Eve before traveling to Cleveland to take on the Browns Thursday Night Football, December 28th. Then they're at the New England Patriots to close out the season January 7th. So, like I said, the Jets are out of it and they're playing for next year. Aaron Rodgers will definitely be in the mix next year and definitely get this team where they need to be. But it's just a lot of questions. I'm not even sure Robert Saleh will be the coach there. Nathaniel Hackett will be the offensive coordinator. There may be some changes there, but we'll just have to see. But getting back to the Miami Dolphins again, they're sitting in a situation where they're 10-4 and they're sitting second in the AFC behind the Baltimore Ravens. And they're if they want to host the conference, their best chance might be Baltimore losing to the 49ers coming up on Christmas night. That's going to be a very interesting game here. And we'll talk more about that game on Sunday, Baltimore's next matchup here. But Baltimore at San Francisco is going to be a marquee game and possibly what they call a Super Bowl preview. But for the Miami Dolphins, looking at their schedule, the only thing they can do is win their football games at this point here and improve as best that they can. Again, they're hosting the Dallas Cowboys this coming Sunday at 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox, so I'm very interested in that game. The Miami Dolphins are then at the Baltimore Ravens on New Year's Eve. So that game could very well come down to the number one seed. And then they turn right around and host the Buffalo Bills the following week of the year. So these last few games for Miami are going to be tough. These are going to be tough games. Losing that Tennessee game low-key might have messed things up for them as far as the conference when it comes to tiebreakers and things. So we'll just have to see how that goes here. But, the Miami Dolphins may be stuck at that 2 spot, even if they went out. Because if Baltimore doesn't lose any games and they beat them head-to-head, then they'll really solidify being the number one seed. So the next couple weeks are going to be very pivotal, and they can't slip up at all if they want to do anything as far as winning the conference here. On the next game we're going to talk about here, as far as the AFC, another AFC matchup here of importance here, the Kansas City Chiefs defeated the New England Patriots by a final score of 27-17. Kansas City, even though they were able to get the victory, they still have some very, very, very deep concerns as far as the offense here. There was another situation where Kadarius Toney dropped another ball, and it actually led to an interception. The ball went off of his hands, and it went right into the defender's hands. And Patrick Mahomes was actually visibly just not happy. He slammed his helmet, sat on the ground, sat on the bench, and said something. He said something to the extent of, "What the heck is going on with this dude?" And me personally, the more and more that happens, people can continue to say they have faith in you. They got faith in you. But when that continues to happen, Mahomes is not going to look in his direction and throw the ball, because if that continually happens, he's just going to keep forcing it to Kelsey. And so, me personally, the Chiefs, they're only 2-2 in their last 4 games, and they're actually 3-3 in their last 6 games. So, the Chiefs, to me, just don't look like the same Chiefs that we've seen over the last 5 years. They host the Raiders on Christmas Day, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. They then host the Cincinnati Bengals on New Year's Eve at 4:25 p.m. Eastern on CBS before traveling to take on the Chargers January 7th. I personally think that they'll win at least 2 of those games for sure. As far as the top seed in the conference, they're still not out of the realm of possibility. They still sit a couple of games behind Baltimore, and they don't face Baltimore head to head. So they have to have a better conference record in order for that to be a factor. But yeah, I mean the Chiefs, to me, they may have a situation where they may be on the road for the AFC Championship if they get that far, which is something they haven't done in years. So this might be one of those situations where the Chiefs may have a home game, possibly 2 home games for the playoffs, and then have to go on the road for the AFC Championship. So it may be a tougher road than in previous years, but the Chiefs are still in a spot to take the top seed. We'll just have to see what happens with the Baltimore Ravens with Miami, especially since they play each other. We'll definitely have to see how that unfolds here for the Kansas City Chiefs. But if I'm the Kansas City Chiefs, do I look at getting another wide receiver? Because you drafted Rashee Rice out of SMU with the 24th pick in the second round. So do you want to pick up another wide receiver? They have a bevy of tight ends already with Travis Kelce, Noah Gray, and Blake Bell. They don't really need tight ends either. So it just makes me wonder where Kansas City is going to draft next year. It'll be very interesting here. That's obviously way down the road, but depending on what happens in the playoffs and depending on how far they get, there may be some changes on the offensive side of the ball that are needed. They're good at running back as far as I'm concerned. So where do you I don't know. If you're the Kansas City Chiefs, it's kind of hard to determine what they're going to do for next season. But for now, they're still playing for that top spot. So that's what I expect from Kansas City going forward. The next game we're going to talk about here is an NFC matchup that took place here between the New York Giants and the New Orleans Saints, with the Saints hosting them. They won by a final score of 24-6 here. The Saints, again, they put themselves in a position here as far as the NFC South, and they're tied with Tampa Bay at 7-7. But Tampa Bay has the tiebreaker as a result of their head-to-head matchup. Now, they do play each other again, so that's the only way the Saints will be able to get that back and possibly take the division. That'll be on New Year's Eve in Tampa. First, they have the Thursday night football matching up coming up here in a couple of days at the Los Angeles Rams that they have to get past first before they head to Tampa. They host the Atlanta Falcons to close out the season on January the 7th for Week 18. So the Saints, as far as I'm concerned, they have to win all these games. They have to, especially with them playing Tampa head-to-head and Atlanta, because Atlanta's only a game behind. So if New Orleans drops any of these games, they're going to be out of it most likely, because I only see one team coming from this division, and it's going to be the division winner. So the New Orleans Saints, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Atlanta Falcons, all within a game of each other. Tampa Bay and New Orleans tied at the top. The Saints got to win all these games, because even if they lose to the Rams here and put themselves at 7-8, that's going to be bad news. Because if the Atlanta Falcons win their game, you'll be tied with them, and then you'll have to play them on the last week. So this is very pivotal for the New Orleans Saints. They got to win these games. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. In order for them to win this division, they have to win these games they got coming up. The New York Giants, on the flip side, at 5-9 here with this loss, they're not out of it as far as the actual playoff race. They're not officially eliminated yet, but they're pretty much on the brink. And as I was discussing with them earlier, they're actually playing a little bit above their skis considering the way things started for this team, with Daniel Jones going down, with them getting blown out by Dallas to start the year. Tommy DeVito, he's definitely stepped in and played really well here. I know we made fun of the guy here, but he's actually 3-1 since he stepped in for Tyrod Taylor with him going out. Daniel Jones was out for the season months ago, so he was never affected to begin with. So Tommy DeVito, he's definitely making a name for himself. He obviously isn't going to be your guy when the season starts next year, because you're paying Daniel Jones a lot of money, and they expect him to be recovered for camp. So naturally, Tommy DeVito is probably still going to be the third-string quarterback. Unless Tyrod Taylor isn't on the team anymore, then he'll most likely become the backup, because he's definitely proven to be capable. So definitely having a great season as far as what he's able to do. But the Giants themselves, I don't see them going anywhere. I don't think they'll be a playoff team, because even if it's a situation where they went out, there could still be some tiebreakers that take them out of contention. So on the next game we're going to talk about briefly here before heading to the afternoon schedule for Sunday, the Carolina Panthers actually defeated the Atlanta Falcons by a score of 9-7 to get just their second win on the season. And again, this pulls the Atlanta Falcons back a game at 6-8 in the division. So just like what I was talking about briefly before with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and New Orleans Saints, the Atlanta Falcons are a game out, but they still got a shot with this division because they still have head-to-head matchups coming up with the Saints and Buccaneers respectively. So all these games matter here. And as far as the Falcons go, they do host the Colts coming up here on New Year's or on Christmas Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox. They're at the Chicago Bears, New Year's Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS, before they host the Saints on January 7th. So they got to win all these games, period. There's really no other way to look at that here. And the thing about Carolina here to me is, again, they're going to have the top pick based on record, but that's going to go to the Chicago Bears because of the trade for Bryce Young. So the Carolina Panthers, they got a lot of questions to answer themselves about their team. They already fired Frank Reich, and they're going to be looking for another coach again after firing Matt Rule the previous year in 2022. So Carolina Panthers, they're just pretty much playing for 2024 at this point. On the afternoon games here, there was 3 of them that took place here. The first one we're going to talk about was the Washington Commanders traveling to take on the Los Angeles Rams. The Washington Commanders are actually already eliminated from playoff contention with their loss last week, so this was kind of to just play out their schedule. But the Rams got the victory to get themselves back at 500 by a final score of 28-20. They're now 7-7. And again, they're in the playoff race currently as the final seed in the NFC because of tiebreakers and because of the seeding right now. So the Rams definitely had a rough year to start, but they're definitely got themselves right again, especially with Matthew Stafford. He did throw 2 touchdowns here in this game, and it's definitely going to be one of those situations where they got to just win their games down the stretch. I'm going to be saying about everybody who's in contention here. They host the New Orleans Saints here on Thursday Night Football coming up here, so I'll have a prediction for you this coming Thursday, and I'll also have a prediction for you for the Saturday games coming up as well. Then they're on the road for their last 2 games. They're at the Giants on New Year's Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox, and then they're at the Rams to close out the year on January the 7th. So we'll just kind of have to see how things shake out with the Los Angeles Rams. But at 7-7, they actually have the lowest, the final seeding in the NFC at this time here. And if they win out, they'll end up keeping that. So that's definitely going to be the goal for them. The next game we're going to talk about here was the San Francisco 49ers. They took on the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals, they're also already out of the playoff race. They're out of playoff contention as well. And for the 49ers, they ended up winning the division with this victory here by a final score of 45-29 as McCaffrey scored 3 touchdowns in this game. And there was just really not much to talk about as far as this game here. Again, the 49ers are now sitting at 11-3. And they won the NFC West here. So the rest of these games that they got here are kind of just more to kind of just solidify that top spot in the conference. They won their division, but they haven't solidified anything at the top of the conference yet. They're hosting the Baltimore Ravens on Christmas, so they have to win this football game. They have to win this football game. This is a must-win for both teams, and it sits as like a Super Bowl preview, as they call it. I don't really like that terminology, Super Bowl preview, but that's just how it looks here as far as that goes here. They're at the Washington Commanders on New Year's Eve at 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox, and then they host the Los Angeles Rams to close out the season on January the 7th. So the Niners, like I said, they're trying to solidify that top spot. If they can beat Baltimore, I think they'll be good to go against Washington. As far as holding out players against the Rams, I'm not sure that they'll actually do that because of the fact that the Rams are playing for something too. They're playing to get that seeding in the NFC playoffs as well. So as far as holding out players, I'm not sure that that's something they'll do. We'll just have to see, but I highly doubt that that's going to happen here as far as the 49ers go. On the next afternoon game we're going to talk about here before we talk about the Sunday night football matchup and then the Monday night football matchup to close out the broadcast was the Dallas Cowboys traveling to take on the Buffalo Bills. And this game, to me, just kind of further solidified what I've said about the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys, they know how to beat up on the teams that aren't quite as good, and they know how to beat up on them at home. But whenever they have to take their show on the road, that's where they see trouble, and that's where things just don't work out for them. They lost by a final score of 31-10. They're 3-4 on the road and 7-0 at home, the Dallas Cowboys. So this just was another example of them not be able to take their show on the road. Dak Prescott was only able to throw for 134 yards, and he had an interception as well. Josh Allen didn't play much better. He was 7 of 15. He had 94 passing yards and he threw a touchdown. But the key here was James Cook. He had 25 carries for 179 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 catches for 42 yards and a touchdown as well. So that was the key for this Dallas Cowboys. They were unable to stop James Cook as well. And other teams are going to see this. They're going to see what it takes to beat this team. You run the ball at them and you keep the clock moving. And that's what keeps not only Dak Prescott off the field, but it keeps Dallas's offense from being able to get any kind of rhythm and be effective. And that's what was crazy about this game. Dallas didn't look anything like they look at home. And that just kind of solidifies what I said about this team. They just never beat the good teams. They always beat up on the teams that are just mid to average, lower tier teams. And the teams that are in contention, they have a hard time with. And this was just another example of that. So the Buffalo Bills improved themselves to 8-6, and they're definitely still looking to get back in the division and in the conference as well. They would be out of the playoff race as of now. But these next few games they got can definitely put them back in the mix here because they're at the Chargers this coming Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern, December 23rd. Then they host the New England Patriots on New Year's Eve at 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS before traveling to Miami to take on the Dolphins January 7th. If they can win all three of those games, that can not only get themselves in a position to win, to get themselves back in the playoff race, but they could win the division if they can get all three of these games here. At 8-6, they can't lose any more games, or they'll probably end up staying out of the playoff race, as far as I'm concerned. On the flip side, the Dallas Cowboys here, luckily for them, the Philadelphia Eagles lost last night to the Seahawks 20-17. So as a result of tiebreakers, they still have the divisional lead at this time, even though they and the Philadelphia Eagles sit at 10-4. They're at the Miami Dolphins on Christmas Eve, 4:25 p.m. Eastern on Fox, before hosting the Detroit Lions on December 30th at 8:15 p.m. Eastern on ABC. Then they're at the Washington Commanders January 7th to close out the year. So the Dallas Cowboys, if they can win out, they'll win the division. But that's the key, win out. The Miami Dolphins and the Detroit Lions are contenders. And as I just stated, the Cowboys are having trouble with these contender teams. So if they slip up at all, they're just going to give it right back to the Philadelphia Eagles as far as the division goes. So in my opinion, the biggest threat in the NFC is the San Francisco 49ers until further notice. And that's not just bias. That's just what I've seen. You know, they were able to beat the Cowboys and the Eagles. The Eagles and Cowboys have beat each other. They split, but neither team is looking all that great right now. So, you know, as far as who wins the NFC East is going to come down to these last few weeks for sure. Dallas at Miami, I'll definitely have a prediction for you for that one for sure, because that's going to be one of those situations where Miami is looking to prove something as well. So we're definitely going to have to watch out and keep our eyes peeled for that one here. The next game we're going to talk about was the Sunday night football matchup that took place between the Baltimore Ravens and the Jacksonville Jaguars. And to me, this was definitely one of those games here that was a statement for the Baltimore Ravens as far as being at the top of the AFC. They won this one by a final score of 23-7 to send the Jaguars to their third straight loss. Trevor Lawrence, he is playing. He's playing through a high ankle sprain injury, which I think is pretty admirable of him. And he was 25 of 43 for 264 yards and a touchdown while scrambling for 4 carries and 41 yards as well. So I thought that was pretty awesome. Lamar Jackson was 14 of 24 for 171 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. But he also ran the ball 12 carries for 97 yards as well. So they were able to get 251 yards on the ground as a team. But the story for this was Keaton Mitchell. He had 9 carries for 73 yards, and he was the second leading rusher, but he had to leave the game with a knee injury. And the knee injury was actually confirmed to be a torn ACL, so he's out for the rest of the season, unfortunately. He was a fine player. He was an undrafted rookie, and he was definitely helping that run game go here, especially with them not having J.K. Dobbins. When you lose a young guy like that, he was a rookie out of East Carolina, undrafted, and he was doing work for this team, but they're unfortunately not going to have him for this run that they want to go on. So, like I said, the Ravens sit at the top of the division here. They'll be playing the 49ers on Christmas night, on ABC, Monday Night Football. As far as the Jaguars there, like I said, they've lost 3 straight games, and they're definitely reeling at this current time, so they definitely got to right the ship. They have no margin for error if they want to win this division. They'll be at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Christmas Eve before hosting the Carolina Panthers on New Year's Eve. Then they'll be at the Tennessee Titans January 7th to close out the year. So the Jaguars, they can't mess up or slip up at all. They'll find themselves in a wild card position, possibly out of the playoffs. Because like I said, Indianapolis and Houston, they're sitting right there at 8-6. So the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'll have an official prediction for you on Sunday here, but at Tampa could be a dangerous game. That could be a very dangerous game, especially with the way Baker Mayfield is playing. So we'll just have to keep our eyes peeled. And again, I'll have a prediction for that game here on Sunday. The last game we're going to talk about here to close out the broadcast here was the game that occurred Monday Night Football last night here between the Philadelphia Eagles traveling to take on the Seattle Seahawks. And that game was won by a final score. Sorry about that. That game was won by a final score, of 20-17 here. The Seattle Seahawks, to me, they just wanted this game more. The Philadelphia Eagles have now fallen to 10-4 and have lost 3 straight on their own as well. And like I said here, Jalen Hurts, he had 2 touchdowns on the ground. He had 13 carries for 82 yards, but throwing the football, he didn't look great at all. He was 17 of 31 for 143 yards with 2 interceptions. They were saying that he had the flu and he was sick over the weekend and actually traveled in a different plane to connect with the team so he didn't get anybody sick. But it definitely showed. He hasn't been as dynamic of a quarterback the last few weeks. And I think even without the illness, this was just another one of those games. Drew Lock actually got the start for Seattle as Geno Smith didn't play. He was unavailable for the game. Drew Lock was 22 of 33 for 208 yards and a touchdown, with Kenneth Walker rushing for 19 carries for 86 yards and a touchdown as well. So they had a nice balanced attack on the ground and through the air. And the late touchdown that he threw to Jackson Smith and Ajigba late to get the victory, the 29-yard touchdown, was definitely the difference. The Eagles, if we're gonna criticize the Dallas Cowboys for not beating the good teams here when they need to, this definitely falls into that category because I had a funny feeling the Seahawks could win this football game, but I just didn't really expect it with the Eagles because them being at the top of the conference is no more as far as I'm concerned. Because with the way San Francisco beat them and with the way they've lost to these last couple of games to Dallas and Seattle, they're just going to be very lucky to maintain winning that division, let alone having a top seed in the conference. Now, luckily for them, they host the New York Giants on Christmas Day, 4:30 p.m. Eastern. They then host the Arizona Cardinals on New Year's Eve at 1 p.m. Eastern on Fox before traveling to take on the New York Giants to close out the year. So I could see them winning these last 3 games because of who they're playing, the Giants and the Cardinals. Those are 2 of the bottom teams in the conference. So this is the thing, though. The Giants are going to play them hard because it's a divisional game. The Giants, even though the Giants, they're probably not going to get in the playoffs. They still got some pride and they still got something left in them too that they could win one of these 2 games. As far as getting a playoff spot or win the division, that's out. For Philadelphia, they have no room for error if they want to win the division. If they want to get things right, they got to start winning games here because these 3 games are right before the playoffs and there's no room for error. The Philadelphia Eagles just don't have the same mojo that they had last year. They were winning a lot of close games and they were playing better on defense, but the defense has a lot of holes in it this year. And when you fire your defensive coordinator here and replace him with Matt Patricia, that just kind of solidifies that you're not really sure about that side of the football with the injuries they've had and with the coaching change they made. So yeah, the Philadelphia Eagles, well, I'll have a prediction for you on Sunday. I have them beating the Giants for sure on Christmas Day, but if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, there's no room for error. And it's just unfortunate that they can't play Dallas again head-to-head to get that division lead back, but that's just kind of how it goes. You only get 2 games a year. So we'll just have to see what the Philadelphia Eagles do. On the flip side, for the Seattle Seahawks here, before we close out the broadcast here, this was a nice victory for them. This was definitely one of those things that keeps them in contention for a spot in the playoffs. Again, the 49ers have already won the division, but as far as a spot in the playoffs here, that definitely keeps them in the mix. They're at the Tennessee Titans on Christmas Eve, 1 p.m. Eastern on CBS. They then host the Pittsburgh Steelers on New Year's Eve, 4:05 p.m. Eastern on Fox before traveling to Arizona to take on the Cardinals on January 7th. All 3 of those games are very winnable by the Seattle Seahawks. All 3 of those games are definitely winnable by the Seattle Seahawks. And when you're looking at the standing as far as the playoffs, remember the Rams got that spot ahead of them, even though they're both sitting at 7-7 because the Ram beat them 2 games head to head. So the Seattle Seahawks have to win out in order for them to have a chance because, again, you have the Saints right there, you have the Falcons, you have the Packers right there, all within a game or so or tied with you for that last wild card spot. So this last few weeks are going to be crazy. Nothing is really solidified yet except for, again, the 49ers winning their division. Other than that, everything else is up for grabs as far as a lot of division titles because there's playoff spots clinched, but there's only one division that's been clinched out of the 8. So we'll just have to see how that works here. Again, closing out the broadcast here, this was the schedule for week 15. There's 3 weeks left in the season. And what's going to happen after that here? On Thursday night, we're going to talk about the Thursday night football matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams to kick off week 16. And then I'll read off the rest of the schedule for you, and I'll have a prediction for you on Sunday. There are some games being played on Saturday, so I'll actually have a preview of those Saturday games coming up as well. The last part of the season, there's going to be games that come up on Saturday and Sunday and Monday and things like that because of the holiday and with Christmas and everything. So the schedule does get kind of funky. But like I said here, this episode here was to kind of talk about everything that occurred for week 15. And I'll have a preview and a prediction for you for the week 16 matchup for Thursday Night Football between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams. And I'll have a prediction for you for a couple of games that are going to be taking place that following Saturday as well. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Hype Show. It's definitely been a while, but I definitely appreciate you tuning in and joining me on this episode here. If you're new to the channel, please be sure to like and comment and subscribe to the channel here. It definitely helps the channel out. And if you're not new, thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I truly appreciate it here. I'll again be back for you on Thursday with a shorter episode, but we'll have a few more games to talk about to kick off week 16. Thank you so much again, and this is the Hype Show. Have a good night. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. You guys have a good one.